I am recording in the cloud this time, and hopefully this works. We're gonna not tap on anything too crazy here, and hopefully we
This
don't end
this
up
is
with a
about
technical
methodology.
difficulty.
This is so boring. People are already feeling sleepy.
I think people are excited about Cowboy. When I do go to the Reddit, I see people start talking about it. They're posting about it, they're adding it in comments, and they're doing that. And one of the
Mm.
things that we haven't done a good job with is sharing Cowboy sessions. I know sometimes we post them in the sessions on Discord, but right now I'm trying to figure out which ones can I go release because I learned mostly by just listening to you when you were doing the live Cowboy stuff or when I
Yeah.
take you privately and task you with something.
Yeah, I mean, we were just screwing around then, and I don't think we would have been able to do what we did if we had the pressure of recording because we
Hmm.
were just learning as we went along there. And if you've got the pressure of like, and this has to be good, this has to be good content that people are going to be interested in watching. It's like, oh, I can't perform in these conditions. Um, but yeah, I think now that we've Cowboy has kind of stabilized as to what works, what doesn't, what can we throw out from the paper methodologies and still have something good that works. And it's become more consistent that we're churning out good quality sessions. Yeah, we should get in the habit of putting them out there, right?
Well, we
Just as
threw
guilty as you.
mostly you threw a bunch of stuff at the wall and then you see what sticks. And I called it out in the doc that like the manual, not a manual that I wrote, that my our night traveler on the Discord, he kind of looked at what you were doing and started to notice patterns. And you say that it's all natural, but there really is this like methodical way that you can walk through doing the session that ultimately unlocks the door and allows you to go further. Because when I first started, you go through a little bit, you get stuck, and then you're just sitting there and I'd be asking you for movement commands and you'd help me along. And once you learn those movement commands to do that yourself, it really like opens the door for the rest of the session to come through.
I don't think I did ever say it's all natural. I hope I didn't. What I
Yeah.
did say repeatedly, I don't know, this maybe isn't true, but I said that there is no cowboy, right? Because cowboy is about not doing stuff, not about following a specific flow chart or learning movement commands or something. The inception of cowboy was like partly trying to bring remote viewing and the Western magical tradition together and do like blind evocation of spirits. And then we were like, wait, we can just do remote viewing this way and it's fun and it's easy and it gives us the flexibility to throw out all of the stuff from our paper methodologies, which is boring and slow and is maybe useful in training, but is not useful operationally. It's just sucking up time and energy and generating paperwork. It's just killing trees needlessly, right? Um, so Cowboy has never been like natural remote viewing, do whatever you want, just sit there and wait for the target to come to you. It's been you are already a competent remote viewer with a paper methodology, so now be competent without paper. So all the stuff that you would be doing in your whatever method you use, just become more flexible with it, become faster with it, put the pen down, unless you want to do a sketch, right? So it was never about not having skills and not developing discipline and not having the habit of inquiring about the target and being curious and researching and asking questions and seeing how it fits together. Like you need to bring all that to the table with you and you need to learn it somewhere else. Cowboy is just a way of applying that is fun, and better for the forests.
Perfectly said. I think that's what I was hoping to get across on this video is there seems to be a gap where when we say unstructured, we don't mean you're not bringing tools to the table. You're
Yep.
not coming in with something. And when you learn a paper methodology, you learn it to the point where it's just a reflex. You just write the numbers on the page, you're doing this. You don't really think about writing down colors or the whole title for the table on S4. You just kind of do it out of reflex. And that's what we're doing in Cowboy is we've done these tools so many times that now they just kind of automatically get executed.
Yeah. When you're learning, those reflexes follow one from another. You do your stage one and then what color is it and what's its texture and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of like if you train remote viewing with a cooldown, you need to do your cooldown to get into the zone to do your remote viewing. And similarly, maybe in the earlier stages of training a paper methodology, you need to finish your stage one before you're going to be able to do stage two. not because you can't do stage two whenever you want, but just because the methodology is helping keep your left brain, your ego, intellect under control and out of the way. And by doing that long succession of stuff, you kind of get sucked into that altered state where well, it's a flow state, I suppose. Not talking about trance states and theta brainwaves and stuff, just a doing without intellectualizing. And then, as you say, when you drill it over and over and over again, eventually now you can take the stages or bits of the stages and you don't need to do the whatever leads up to those. Like you don't need to do stage one to do stage two. You don't need to do stage three to do stage four. You can hop about. And I would challenge anybody who's trained a paper methodology to get yourself a practice target, start your session, maybe do an ideogram if you love ideograms. I do, but you don't need to. And then go straight into stage three or straight into stage four or straight into stage six. And you'll see that you can do it. It works fine, right? We don't need to follow this step-by-step thing. So don't.
And I think that's what we're doing most of the time is we're calling it out. We do the ideogram to start in the air. We open it up. Then we're kind of in TRV stage three aspect discovery where we're looking at multiple
Yeah.
gestalts. And then
But
from there, it's what
we're
do we want
both
to do? If
TRV viewers, though, right?
yeah,
So
we're both
those are the
TRV.
tools that we bring to the cowboy table. You don't have to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. And in the Magic in the Noise put out a video. David Powell responded to it. They were kind of battling over whether you should look at the target first or do a autonomic ideogram. And in Cowboy, it's kind of making your own method. There's no reason why you couldn't do both. And I think there's no reason why you couldn't do both on paper. But in Cowboy, we're like the method, anti-method is explicitly giving you permission. Any tool that you get, bring it to the table. You can do ideogram first, then take a look. You can do take a look first, then do an ideogram, or you can do neither. It's really up to you. But I think the big point was have some tools, bring them to the table, have a lot of
Yeah.
fun, and
And then
quickly execute
experiment
them.
and do what works,
Exactly.
right? Get some results, and then who cares?
Yeah.
And it's not even like what you do or what I do is better, is it? It's like it works for me. I get the results this way. It might not work for you. Who cares? You know,
That's why I said Dave
different methods are
Two's
better for different
Cowboy.
people. Sorry.
That's why I said Dave Two's Cowboy Manual, not a manual, because
Mm.
it's just what I'm doing. But I know we both will see the astral dot vision and get a hologram and interact with it very kinesthetically, but that's not technically required.
No,
And
no.
I know Josh has a potential manual that's going to come out soon as well,
Yeah,
and really
I'm
looking
looking
forward to
forward
get
to it.
that. I want
Yeah.
everybody to write one because the more people do something, like when Ed Royden released the Royden method, we all get an opportunity to learn what someone else is doing and what's working for them. And that just
Mm.
gives us another chance to learn more tools to bring into our tool set and try out in our own sessions.
Yeah. I think it's super valuable to study more than one method and different viewers, adaptations and quirks. Like I've learned three or four paper methods, and the big value for me is that it helps you triangulate on what you're really doing. Because if you only ever learn one method, the method and remote viewing get conflated together, and it's hard to pick apart. Like, is what's important about what I'm doing, and what is just this rote thing that I've learned. And
Mhm.
then when you go and do another method, you're breaking that training, and you're doing the same thing. You're doing remote viewing, but all of that rote learning stuff is different. But the remote viewing thing is common, and now you've got two angles to look at it. And Cowboy is like another progression of that, isn't it? That we're breaking the rote learning part and zeroing in on the remote viewing thing, the skill that's underneath the written structure. That sounds very
Definitely.
deep. It's not, is it? It's just like break some rules.
I think the same thing happened in the Dash chat. We start to get deep, but it's meant not to be deep.
Yeah, it's not
The
super complicated.
paradox.
It's
Yeah.
actually quite straightforward.
The biggest thing for me was as soon as I drop the pen and paper, then I get there's no break in the session for me. I'm not jumping into the data and jumping out. I'm really just
Mm.
staying completely there in the zone. And then we can use that black visual space in our mind in order to drop data onto. And it kind of just stays there. So if we move something off to the corner, it kind of just persists. And
Yeah,
then we can come back and we're like, oh yeah, I forgot I put that there. It's like losing your keys.
yeah, and it's not. That's not Cowboy. right?
It's not cowboy because everything's cowboy, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that on a paper session because I'd never have a mental model of
I
there.
mean, you wouldn't have a big enough piece of paper, right?
Yeah.
You have that bit in the TRV where you're supposed to get your stage three and fours from each of the site aspects and lay out all these sheets of paper in front of me. And it could be like 10 sheets of paper that you're supposed to. And it's like, have you seen my desk? There's no fucking. And I'm there with piles of stuff everywhere, like balancing the stage threes here. And that's like, right now we've got to draw them all on the thing. And it's unwieldy. Like it's great, but it takes a lot of real estate. And if you just do all that in your head, it's it's easy, isn't it?
The the act of drawing and getting it onto paper, the act of writing, it takes time. And every time that I'm sitting there making a drawing or doing something, that's great if you're doing an autonomic sketch because then you're logging the autonomic sketch that you made. When we do the ideograms in the air, we don't get an artifact of that data. We don't actually get to see it.
But I don't care what your ideogram looks like because
Yeah.
that's not going to tell me as an analyst or a customer about the target, right? Just like I don't care about your stage two data, probably. Like,
Well, over time, you can see how your ideograms are changing. If
yeah,
something's
yeah, that's
happening,
useful
you
for
can.
you as a viewer, though, right? But it's not. If an ideogram was useful to the consumer of the remote viewing data, we wouldn't do anything else in the session, would we? We'd just scribble a weird line on the page and give it to them and be like, "Here's your ideogram.
I,
Congratulations." It's
I was
fucking
talking about
useless.
for
No
us.
good. To
Yeah. But
um,
if we're talking
it's a
about
tool for us, right?
the
So we don't
consumer,
need to create that artifact, I don't think.
whoever needs the data, the person that you're doing the viewing for, it doesn't really matter if we produce the sketch during the session or we pull it from memory after. And
Yeah.
like I was saying about these persistent visuals is I kind of think of learning mental visualization as the art of learning how to paint inside your mind. And then the thing that I've been working a lot on is I can close my eyes, I can proprioceptively build my body out, build an in-memory representation of the room, and quickly go navigate that, which is kind of like a waking lucid dream. And then the question that I've had is how do I pass off that ability to paint to my subconscious so that I'm getting the data from somewhere else? And I think starting to make progress there. So I'd rather not interrupt that data stream and just
Yeah.
allow it to continue. And I think that it's really hard in methodologies that are not a non-methodology like Cowboy in order to give yourself permission to do that. With Cowboy, I feel like we're giving permission where I can close my eyes for a very long amount of time. I guess
Mhm.
ERV has that, and
Yeah.
allowing that data to come through. And afterwards, I can just close my eyes again and see that picture that I built in my mind very quickly, and then I can draw it from memory.
Yeah. If you're doing a real big session,
Mhm.
I mean, maybe I'd just have a weak working memory, but like I think it's helpful for me to draw stuff down. But I'm wearing an eye mask and I lift it up, so I'm just peeking underneath it, and it's still very dark, and I'm like trying to stay kind of in the zone. And I think you're right that it is a real benefit of Cowboy is just staying connected to the signal line and to just go. Um, because when we're doing paper, as you say, it's like actually hundreds of little psychic events rather than one long kind of continuous thing that's blended together. And I think both are okay, right? They're fine, but certainly my experience of doing cowboy sessions is much deeper and more immersive and more fun and more detailed often because you're kind of I feel like Cowboy after 10 minutes, you're in the same kind of state of mind as you would be after like an hour and a half working on paper or something that's much, much quicker to get down to that level, isn't it?
Well, I think we've in TRV, you discover all the gestalts, then you do S1 through 4 on it. And we've kind of already done that after 10 or 15 minutes on the
Mm.
target. And that would take 45 minutes to an hour and a half. And then that's when we finally get into stage 6. And it's like, go take a
Oh,
look.
finally, we can do some remote viewing.
Finally, after you're burnt out and have
Yeah,
no
yeah,
psychic juice left in the tank, now would
yeah.
be a good time to go take a look.
But
And
then it's like, well, no, if you're tired, take a break. You don't need to go straight into stage six, right? And then wait, so tomorrow I'm going to pick up my session and go straight into stage six. You mean I could have done that all along?
exactly.
Wait a minute. What if?
That's the way that I'm taking my version of Cowboy. What I'm doing is what we're doing right here is we haven't lost our audio stream, we haven't lost our visual stream, but in the paper sessions, we kind of leave those last. where you take a look at those things last, and then phonetics comes after that. And I'm trying to see if we can invert that, where the canvas of what we're doing is not just the locking mechanism, but the canvas is a visual representation. So we're not, oftentimes we don't get long, persistent actual visuals of the target, but we're getting that gestaltic data where I think it
Yes.
happens for you too. If you get a structure, it's kind of like a astral dot matrix box that you see kinesthetically, like right in
Oh,
front of
I
you.
tend to draw an ideogram and I'll just keep the ideogram in my visual proprioceptive space, my kind of local, whatever that screen is,
It's
the
some
Minority Report screen. And
it's a
then,
gestaltic representation
yeah,
of the data,
as
but
I
it's not the
investigate it,
target.
it will gain fidelity, and
Yeah.
become a picture of the thing. Maybe not an accurate picture of the thing, but it will become a picture of the thing, some kind of rendering of properties that the thing has.
You start with nothing, then you have an ideogram. If I have a structure, it typically looks like a box. So
Yeah.
the ideogram flips out of 3D, and then as you interact with the box, it starts to get more and more specific
I
in
don't have
my
a
visuals
box
as well. Yeah.
stage, but yeah,
Maybe it's a tool you can add. Try it out.
yeah, maybe. But
I
then
didn't,
maybe the box is going to bias you. What if the structure is like an oil pipeline? It's really long and not boxy. Yeah. Maybe you're
what
trying
I'm
to
saying
put
is
your
the structure
data into a box.
starts as a box. And then instantly when you interact with it, you touch it, then you're like, oh, that's not a box, that's round. So then
Oh,
it
okay.
becomes
Yeah, yeah. I
round.
mean, my ideograms do that. But I think we should stress this is not cowboy, right?
Everything is cowboy because we're talking about tools and then we're bringing all of these tools to the table. So I think what's important is if we say that there isn't anything that's cowboy, then I think everyone's just going to close their eyes and wait for the crystal ball to show them the stuff.
Well,
When the
look, if you're
power of
doing a
cowboy,
methodology already where you do
mhm,
that, but you have a piece of paper in front of you and you're getting good results, then sure.
mhm,
I don't think anybody much is. Some people do, but it's about the hardest, way for a normal person who's not got some pre-existing talent to become a remote viewer, I think, is to just be like, I'm just going to wait and see what happens. You know,
yeah,
there's real value in the paper methodologies to learn how to be psychic. But I think people who are like born with it or just get psychic gifts at some point, people who have car accidents and bereavements and illnesses and stuff. There's like extreme events in people's lives. Sometimes they're just like, boom, I can see dead people. What is happening? And if you have a gift like that, you don't need to do stage one, stage two. It's just like it's all the doors are blown open. So that person could do cowboy that way, right? And in fact, there wouldn't even be any value really to somebody with that natural ability to do cowboy because cowboy, as it is now, is conceived as an antidote to the bits of paper structure which are not good operationally or
mhm,
don't help us operationally because like paper structure helps us learn, right? We learn loads of great tools, but they're like stuck in this rigid framework and the order we do them and when we're allowed to do them and when we have to stop doing them and how we interpret them and how we don't interpret them and what do we do with our AOLs and all of this stuff is like one monolithic thing. And Cowboy's like, right, let's drop this on the floor, smash it into 1,000 pieces, and pick up the ones we want when we want them. Right. So if you're some mega natural psychic who just sits there and looks in the crystal ball or closes your eyes and you get the stuff you need, what are you going to get rid of? You haven't got that baggage to drop in that case, have you? Whereas I think as remote viewers who train on paper, we pick up a lot of baggage. And what I was saying about learning multiple methodologies, allowing you to triangulate on the remote viewing and distinguish it from the method, our baggage is what is left of that lack of distinction between remote viewing and methodology, right? Because some people will not make a distinction between remote viewing and methodology. They'll say like it is CRV, CRV is remote viewing, and it's like obviously not. I think Ingo would disagree with you there, as would Joe Monagle and many other good remote viewers who never bothered with CRV, right? Um,
reading Joe's books opened it up for me because typically when people talk about the history of remote viewing, they think it started with Ingo and CRV, but really there was Joe and Pat Price early on. And then it wasn't until the second round of remote viewers came in where they were really interested about how do we train non-psychics. And David, Eric, and Sasha in that video from Magic and the Noise, they interviewed Ed Dames, and he said that it's a great training program, but then you got to bring those tools into something differently to make it operational. And I think that's what we're saying with Cowboy is go through the training program, build your own kind of methodology the way that it works for you, and nothing's off the table as long as it works. But the biggest point that I think we're trying to make, or I want to make, is you got to bring the tools. You got to go learn
Yeah,
that
yeah, you have
stuff.
to actually have the skills, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can't do the thing.
And
Yeah.
both you and I are saying start with paper because that teaches you all the
Yeah.
tools and then transition. And it
Was it
took
you who
me,
tried to teach someone cowboy who had no remote viewing experience?
I want to do that
Oh,
because,
somebody did. I can't remember who it was. They were just like, this probably isn't going to work, but they, I'm kind of curious just to, and it was a total disaster.
well,
It wasn't
I
just
mean,
like
you
couldn't
remember
do the things, right?
everybody would be doing their rounds on Discord and hitting their targets. And then I was training and I'd try and do it. And I close my eyes. I get nothing. It was just black silence. I'd sit there and be like, color, nothing, texture, nothing, smell, nothing, taste, nothing. For some reason, I just couldn't get any of the stuff. And I don't know if it was the pressure of doing it in front of someone or
No,
what.
I think it's the discipline of paper because
Hmm.
the first time, like my realization about paper having kind of messed me up in a way, um, was nothing to do with Cowboy remote viewing. This was like a year or two pre-Cowboy. And we were messing about with a skin galvanometer, which is like the non-Scientology version of the Scientology e-meter. I have yours, by the way. I'm going to get in the post to you soon. Um,
Awesome.
and we were like, I wonder if this thing reacts to remote viewing. Like, can we tell when we're on target or not? Or does something change? What the thing does, for those who don't know, is it measures like the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So it's basically, are you in kind of a stressy state or a relaxy state, if you like? That's more complex than that, but the output of the thing is like a dial. There's more or less. Um, so we were like, okay, I've got the thing here. I'll live stream the software which shows the output from it. Daz gave me a training target that was just like any old training target. And then I got my pen and paper out. But the thing is, with the skin galvanometer, you have to hold this metal thing in one hand and keep your hand really still. Otherwise, it screws up the readings. So I was there, like holding this thing in my left hand and trying to write my session. And the paper was like sliding around on the desk because I couldn't use my left hand to hold. And I'm there, like trying to. And it was kind of in the process of that I realized I actually cannot be psychic without poking a piece of paper with a pen. I'm like, what? Surely this is not an inherent limitation in psychic abilities, right? Because I shouldn't need to get a pen and be like, book, book, to perceive data. But because I've just been doing nothing but paper methodologies since forever, that's like the Pavlovian conditioning, the trigger. Oh, I have to probe things. I have to do ideograms. I have to write stuff, and then the data will flow from there because that's the signal that I've learned, or the remote viewing part of me has learned. Okay, now we produce the data, and I had no way to trigger it. So you know that one of my trademark moves in Cowboy is to draw ideograms in the air, right? And that is how I got myself off paper because you can kind of close your eyes, pretend there's some paper there, and an ideogram will actually execute. If you draw it with your finger, it will work just like with the pen. But now you have the advantage that you're not holding a pen, and that ideogram is in like your psychic mental space, and you can do what you want with it. Then it's not. There's no ink. There's no paper. You can zoom into it, zoom out of it, rearrange it, throw it away. You do what you like with it, and that was the single thing which allowed me to start functioning without paper. So if anybody wants to make the leap from paper into Cowboy and they're having that experience that you had, Dave, where it's just like nothing's happening, how do I make it go? Try doing bits of your remote viewing session with your finger in the air and just draw on an imaginary page. Works great. You can also visualize yourself doing the session, which that was an idea from Laurie Williams, that if you just visualize yourself sitting down at a table and getting your paper out and doing the thing, and you can watch yourself draw the ideogram, and it'll be accurate. It works. It's really funny. But I guess you could somehow use that as a gateway into Cowboy as well. But sorry, I got super sidetracked there.
No, I'm so glad you were willing to come on and do this because I think you're doing a lot better job explaining it than I could.
Oh, well, you keep reminding me about random stuff that, the inception of Cowboy, like we didn't have a clear idea where we were going with this at all. It was just like, hey, let's experiment and see
Well,
where this goes. There was no
at,
design or goals or anything with
at
this.
first it was right like front loaded. You have some entity or bio, you put them in your hand, and
Well,
like
it was
Star Wars, Obi-Wan
we
Kenobi.
used to say the target is anything you could have a conversation with. So it
Hmm.
could be like Mickey Mouse, Donald Trump, Zeus, whatever. So it was a pretty broad front loading. But we started off doing it with a view to like doing a kind of blind remote viewing style version of magical evocation, where people traditionally speak to deities and demons and spirits and stuff, but then the chaos magicians were like, hey, we can talk to Batman and Sherlock Holmes, and really annoyed all of the traditionalists because that works great. And they were like, yeah, that's fake, it's not real. And it turned out we did that stuff blind with various fictional characters, and it works great when you're blind to the target. So, I'm now on the side of those chaos magicians who upset the apple cart with their Sherlock Holmes nonsense. Definitely.
I think slapping blind onto any of these psychic tools, I'd really like to see channeling do that as well. It
Yeah.
probably helps because then that eliminates the conscious bias. Seeing some of those where we've pulled something up and then someone's interviewing it and talking about it, it is really surprising when you're sitting there knowing that they're so on target and
Hmm.
they have no idea. They're saying things that this person would never say.
Yeah.
And it's really great. Another thing I was going to talk about was the ideogram process. When you take it off the page, you can go three dimensional.
Yeah,
So
mine went three-dimensional on their own. I
same,
wasn't expecting them to.
yeah. And then it starts to kind of, let's say like you have a location, it kind of
Mhm.
starts to map out like a trace of all the edges, and then you just realize, oh, this is basically going to go draw the target.
I think on paper as well, ideograms respond to what you repeatedly ask them to do.
Hmm.
So if you were always doing particular types of targets, like financial ones, Daz was talking recently about how his ideograms have become like stock chart lines for his financial targets. When we were starting up doing Cowboy, I got given so many fictional targets as blind targets that spontaneously I got a new ideogram for this is fictional because I kind of kept being a bit like, oh God, it's another made up thing. When I got
Hmm.
feedback of being, having that emotional reaction to it, which I guess fed back into the system somehow. So on paper, you can get more ideograms or your ideograms will change over time. And what's interesting about the cowboy experience of doing ideograms just in your mind with your finger is that they'll change and grow over time, but they will adapt to the medium, the flexibility of the medium. For me, that meant 3D, like an example of one, we have the classic, the loop for a life form. Mine will now come out in 3D, so it's like a spiral.
Hmm.
So if you look at it from one end, it still looks exactly like it would on paper, but now I know it's got this 3D thing to it. And that means like story person. So it could be, I don't know, Gandhi or someone, right? Somebody about whom there's a public narrative and the private, the real person is kind of distinct from the history books or the movie or whatever. Which is just an example of how the ideogram will expand given with whatever tools you give it. And they have color now as well. When I dial up people, their ideograms are colored. And I don't know what they mean. I'm sure there's a chart on the internet somewhere. It's like, oh, pink means that they're like really into cats, and I don't know, but they do have colors. I should start writing them down and find out what they're trying to say to me. But
And
it's
the
super cool.
color is because when you're doing it, do you close your eyes and then as you do it, you basically see it drawing it into your mind? And that's what the color comes from? Or is it a
Um,
sense or feeling of color?
as I draw the ideogram, you might generally, if you do this kind of like inner visualization, forming shapes and stuff, people tend to do it in like white or brilliant blue or gold or fire or energy or something. If you try and like push energy out of your finger to really force the image to be there, that's, I started doing that practicing magic. So I kind of had that habit. So generally, everything is kind of blue color in my inner space. And so if I draw an ideogram, it's just like, that when people do that long exposure photography where they like wave lights around with a really long exposure and draw cool pictures, it
That's
looks
what it
kind
feels
of like
like.
that. And the blue. And when I draw an ideogram for a life, or like usually a person, I'll draw it, it'll loop. And like you do ideograms so quick, you're not like watching the line as you do it. When you do an ideogram on paper, it's like, and then you look at it and go like, oh, that looks like a life form. Oh, that looks like a structure, right? You haven't got time to judge it while you execute it. For me, it's when I look at it internally after I've drawn it, I'm like, oh, it's got a color. And the thing just has the property of being green or something. Uh, and yeah, that's cool.
I'm gonna dive into my own monologue here, which may hit on like three different points. But you mentioned some things that were kind of important, and this will transition into weird stuff. But if we say like we're choosing a color, those are the things that with Cowboy I've learned to try and not do. And like as you're saying, just when you execute the ideogram, you just observe what it is. You allow it to happen. And the reason why I love ideograms is because it's like that initial point that's saying, "Hello, subconscious. I am willing to hand over all the reins to you right now to allow you to do something." And it's kind of like that initial handshake that starts the
Mm,
process, and that gets the floodgates open, which is great. The other thing with that is on observing, the thing that really unlocked Cowboy for me that is I was going through what, like a whole month. I was just missing every target on paper. And we don't know if I was, my subconscious was getting bored. I was interfering. I just was too confident. I don't know what. But I basically just started doing morning and nighttime astral temple meditations where you sit here, you visualize the room, you leave, you go off to space, and then you imagine a building. And one of the biggest breakthroughs for me was instead of going and imagining that temple, it was to go up and just be like, what do I experience here? I don't see anything yet, and I have to go interact with it. So as you interact with it, you execute all of your senses. And it just like the cowboy hologram thing we were talking about, it starts to build itself out. Then what I realized is I can make all these movement commands and do all of this and go and explore this area. And as I go do stuff, stuff just starts showing up. And then I started to get feedback during my daily life, which was something I saw last week that I wrote down in my journal would then show up somewhere. So I started to realize that whatever I'm allowing to come through is psychic data. And I think as soon as I switched over and said, let's take it to a targeting cowboy, it nearly immediately worked from that point. It took
mm,
what, like a month or two to really get going with it. But that was the thing that allowed it was fully giving up the reins to say,
It's
here's
creating
the
the space for it
space.
to be there.
Yeah. And that morning
People
and
could
night.
do. Josh does a maneuver where he's like, imagine a box and it says target on the box. And now, like, open the box, what's in there? So that there's like this blank area in your mind and your imagination hasn't got time to fill it in. Just like your hand draws an ideogram and you haven't got time to look at it or judge it, it just happens, right? And it's like you can create that moment inside your mind, or like switching on a TV screen or opening a door really fast. So whatever is going to create that space that must be filled, and the non-local data will just flow into that space and fill it.
I didn't know Josh does that. That's great. In Luigi's meditation tapes that I always reference that I love, the bilocation and Gateway to Beyond. In both of those, one he imagines a doorway, the other he imagines a screen, and then that's the moment when you walk through that. That's where the experience is going to happen, and you can use that with the target and try and experience something that way. What I do is I take that ideogram and I basically am like, it's a chaos magic thought form. That's a sphere. It's got the little God point in the middle. And then I take that and I open it. And inside of that, as Dad says, the ideogram has all the data. That's
Mm.
where I get this. It literally looks like a dome of holographic, weird astral woo-woo. And then right in the middle is what I'm actually supposed to be seeing.
Yeah.
And it's taking that
You can do it
same
however you
concept
want. Like
of the box.
in David Morehouse's ERV, you use like a portal
Hmm.
to visualize a swirly, it's like going down the Stargate. It's really fun. Um, and at the other end, you're at the target. So yeah, that idea of going through the doorway or into the screen or into the thing
into the
then like
box, into the
wraparound
thought form.
perception of the target rather than looking at it on little limited things. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely worth doing.
Then my other transition was from learning that through visual meditation daily. I know that in all of the stuff about going and building an astral temple and leaving your body and doing all that mentally, building a second body, they always want you to um, not break the stream of consciousness. So you're not jumping to the target. You're actually flying into your neighborhood, going above, seeing the city, going into the stars. You see the moon, you do all that. And with doing that, I realized that's a way that I can actually explore a target as well. Oftentimes in movement commands on paper, you're going from being blind to blind, right? But when what I'm seeing when I do the cowboy stuff is I'm seeing that hologram, and when I make a movement command, it gradually moves there. So I don't break the stream, right?
Mm.
If I feel like I'm here and there's something else on the other side of the earth, it like zooms out and allows me to see it, and something happens, and you'll find out the
That
target was
that
a space
continuity
station.
doesn't need to be spatial, though.
No.
It could be temporal and it can be conceptual.
Hmm.
Like, if anybody listening to this is a huge nerd and familiar with graph theory, they'll know that everything can be represented as a graph, which you've probably seen one, like the social network is the archetypal one with like little points connected with lines and like what connects to what by, you know. Um, so you can navigate through that if it's conceptual information. Like, say you've got a bunch of aspects of your site, or there's a life form and there's a structure and there's energy, and you look at how do those things relate together. You can do that continuous navigation through the concepts and the relationships between the aspects without having to actually place them in space, because a lot of things don't go in space, do they? They're just ideas or properties or something. So likewise, time, you can do that continuously, zoom through the timeline. So yeah, I like the point of continuity though. This has just reminded me of something which is sort of tangentially related to that, which is a conversation I was having on the Discord the other day about castle building, right? In that when you learn a paper methodology, you are strictly instructed that, whatever you got for your stage one ideogram shouldn't be influencing what you're doing in stage three, right? Or stage
Hmm.
two. You shouldn't get say you get a life for your stage one. You shouldn't then be in stage two going, oh, I got hard. It can't be hard. Life forms are squishy. Like, oh, I got blue. Life forms aren't blue. It can't be like, like you shouldn't be self-censoring your data based on your data. Um, it's a very similar mechanism to AOL, and it will screw you up. Any single data point could be wrong. And then once your accuracy gets above a certain level, and when you're doing this wild cowboy stuff where you're trying to maintain that continuous focus on the target that's like unbroken, then it's completely the opposite, isn't it? Now you're deliberately castle building. You're going, here is some data. I'm going to build on it. And it struck me that it's a higher stakes approach, because if you're wrong at the start, you've just wasted the whole session because you've just built shit upon shit. You built a big castle poop. But if when it works, which is hopefully most of the time, it's much quicker and you can get much more accurate data. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting distinction between the two.
I feel like it's easier to distinguish between AOL and data though when
Mm,
you do have that continuous thing. Because if I'm going to visualize something such as my room on that aphantasia scale from 1 to 5, I'm going to visualize it at a 5 after about 3 minutes. But in Cowboy, oftentimes I never get there.
mm,
So as soon as I see something becoming very solid and almost dreamlike in lucidity, I know that it's something that is my own mental
mm.
representation. And then most of the flashes that I get where you see a visual flash,
Mm.
usually I call those out as AOL because it's not my holographic representation of the
It's
data.
not in that continuous thread of awareness. It's just random
And that
flashes
thread
of
of
noise by the
awareness
wayside.
is only observed where
Mm,
I've said I'm not painting the space. The model of the subconscious coming to paint it, that's the painter, and I'm just sitting back watching, right? So I'm just observing the whole time. And I think that allows for a distinction where when you're doing a paper session and you're getting visual information, you're not really sure whether the visual was AOL or if it was data. And in this, I do feel like it separates that out quite well.
Cowboy also permits much more flexibility in how you approach AOLs
Hmm.
because the ideal way to deal with AOL in most parts of most paper methodologies that have them most of the time is like detachment and letting go and dropping them by the wayside. And maybe you might do stage 5 occasionally, but you kind of ignore them, right? That or you hope to kind of ignore them and train
Hmm.
yourself to have them less. Whereas Cowboy allows you to stage 5 wherever you want or to interpret things symbolically. And after a while, you kind of go, oh, it's a this, right? I think that's an AOL, or I think that's symbolic. What does that mean? You go a layer deeper, and it's like, oh, here this unpacks into a whole load of data that's like stage 4 level or above. And it started off as a picture of a horse or something, and now it's like half a page of detailed information about the target. Whereas, you would just write AOL horse and ignore it in your paper session. So when you spend more time interacting with what we would call AOLs and unpacking them, I think you slowly peel back the layers on that so that your AOLs become less AOL-y and you interpret them more automatically and eventually that intermediary thing goes away and the data, you just get the data straight away eventually.
Another distinction in AOLs is that there's your what gateway from the Monroe Institute we call your C1 consciousness. That's what we usually mean by an AOL is it's playing the guessing game of charades. But then
Mm.
as Josh points out in his Reddit post about AOLs, the other one is that symbology is the language of the subconscious. So when we toss
Yeah, yeah.
away all of the AOLs, what if your subconscious was tossing you a charade to basically say, this is a lot like this. You'll know a lot about the target if you think about this. And
Mm.
just having that freedom to go entertain it for a second,
Yeah.
it's just like I guess I'm going to bring up Birdie broke the internet by coming back to remote viewing. And in that talk, she was talking about not judging the data that comes through because you don't want to tell your subconscious, no, I don't want any of this. It's that
Mm.
you want to give the direction, please give me more. And I feel like when we allow the AOL to be analyzed, we do that. It really feels like the data stream just gets much wider. And somewhere in the session, you and I usually get something that feels like a download where in half a second or a second, it's all of a sudden,
Mm.
I have 6 things I need to go unpack. And
Yeah.
now
That
instead
usually
of,
takes the form of, wait, what's this? Oh, blah,
oh,
blah, 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 blah.
but then we have that space where we're given the freedom to ourselves to go
Mm.
explore that. We can go unpack the whole thing. It may take
Yeah.
3, 4 minutes to explain what we experienced in
But
half a
this is
second.
not necessarily good if you're a beginner at remote viewing, though,
No, you shouldn't do that if
is
you're a
it?
beginner. No.
Leave the
Yeah.
AOLs alone. We're not saying don't do AOLs if they're in your method, for sure.
Yes. And in both my doc in the Dash chat and this now, we basically said learn the basics, bring the tools, and then at that point, when you've built some discernment over AOL versus data versus symbology, then you can start to execute some of these things more effectively.
Yeah, cool. Simple
Yeah.
as that. Easy, right? I
Cool.
think we're at the end of however long that was.
Yeah, I think it's about 50 minutes, 45. We don't want to
That's
talk too
perfect.
much, but we did a lot.
Yeah, quit while you're ahead. And we can't tell people the juicy secret stuff anyway.
Exactly. I hope the recording worked. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
Appreciate
no,
it.
it's been fun.